My name is Kat Miller, and I'd like to welcome you to Open Circle. On behalf of our steering committee, all the volunteers who help make this possible. Today's Open Circle mission statement is going to be read by Loretta Downs. Open Circle provides a supportive environment to gather for social interaction and to improve our understanding of ourselves, our community, and our world. Presentations span a wide range of intellectual, cultural, and physical and spiritual topics. We do not necessarily agree with the ideas and philosophies of our presenters. We do encourage you to listen with an open mind and form your own opinions. Thank you, Loretta. That basically says, don't give us any crap. Sorry. I don't have Tourette's, but there's something goes on that is probably not so good. If you haven't signed up on our email sign-up list and would like to do so, you can do so under the tree. There's a clipboard with a sign-up sheet. You can also go to opencircleajijic.org and go to our beautiful website. You can see who's coming up, who's been. You can see photos. I was just on it the other day. Also, in the near future, like soon, very, very soon, we've talked to you about how we're going to do videos and streaming and how you can access previous talks from all the years that they've been recorded. And so we've been talking to you about a way to do that. Well, midstream, we've come up with another way to do it that's really simple and quite fabulous. And Brad, who is filming now, he has paired up with Open Circle to bring you all the videos over time for free. Absolutely free. Now that's going to take a bit of time for him to upload them all, right? So he's done about 35 or so far, and he's starting back with the originals. And there's like 300 and something videos, right, of all those times. So over time you'll be able to get them all free. The way you do this is you go to a YouTube. It's youtube.com, chapaladrone. Chapaladrone. You can find that on the website, not right in this moment. We'd like you to wait about a week, and you'll see Chapaladrone. You can click on it, and it will take you to the YouTube site. That's the easiest way, because if you're like me, you're not going to remember this. Like, what? Huh? So anyway, we're so happy that we can now bring you all the episodes for free. So thank you so much for your patience as we switch over to this new way, too, because we've been explaining things to you the last few weeks. We'd like to welcome those of you here for the first time. So if you're here for the first time, if you'd please just stand up, and we'd love to acknowledge you. Come on. Oh, nice. Nice to see you. Very nice to have you here. We don't really want you to move here, but we're happy you've come for a short visit, and you did not bring your car. In case you do not pay attention to my directions and you decide to move here, do not bring your car. Or do, but keep it in your garage. Sorry, prejudice. Oh, what did our Open Circle mission statement say? Oh, never mind. I don't know if I did this one last week. I can't recall, but I think it's worth saying this again. No husband has ever been shot while doing the dishes. My son wanted to know what it's like to be married. I told him to leave me alone, and when he did, I asked him why he was ignoring me. Yep. Yeah. Sorry, it's supposed to be funny. That's actually a one on truth. While shopping in a food store, two nuns happened to pass by the beer, wine, and liquor section. One asked the other if she would like a beer. The second nun answered that indeed it would be very nice to have one, but she would feel uncomfortable purchasing it. The first nun replied that she would handle it without a problem. She picked up a six-pack and took it to the cashier. The cashier was surprised, so the nun said, "This is for washing our hair." Without blinking an eye, the cashier reached under the counter and put a package of pretzel sticks in the bag with the beer. The curlers are on me. older woman, sometimes called a senior citizen, phoned her doctor's office. Is it true, she wanted to know, that the medication you have prescribed has to be taken for the rest of my life? Yes, I'm afraid so, the doctor told her. There was a moment of silence before the senior lady replied, I'm wondering then just how serious is my condition, because this prescription is marked no refills. A young boy to his father. Dad, did you know in other countries you don't know who your wife is until you marry her? The father responded, it's like that everywhere, son. Thought I'd better get back at the, women after the other one. Words of wisdom today are from George Carlin. I know. Just go ahead and laugh and then we'll do it. Life's journey is not to arrive at the grave safely in a well-preserved body, but rather to skid in sideways, totally used up and worn out, shouting, woohoo, man, what a ride. Next week's presentation, Creation and the Afterlife, Perspectives of 6 Cultures, presented by Daniel Ekaf, PhD. And he's here right now, so that's what he looks like. Yeah, that's nice. So he's going to be here next week. From the dawn of consciousness, humans have looked to the stars and asked themselves 3 fundamental questions. Where did we come from? What is the best way we should live? What happens when we die? Dr. Ekaf will briefly explore the answers to each of these questions based on the mythology or stories of Native Americans, Australian Aborigines, Judeo-Christians, Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists. Then there is a revolutionary view of creation and the afterlife that millions of people around the globe are now considering as an alternative view. Dr. Ekaf's PhD is in philosophy, sociology, and education. He has been a seminar leader and radio talk show host and is author of 15 books, including 3 philosophical spiritual works of fiction, God Lied, What's Really Going On Here, The Mysteries of Kwan, and Golf and the Zen Master. So that should be fabulous. Our centering moment today is with Patricia Guy.
Good morning. Okay, it's on. I've heard people ask, they would like to be able to center more, they'd like to meditate more, but they just can't sit still. Is there an alternative? Yes. There are meditations you can do in movement, standing, or lying down. So today I want to share one that you can do standing up that I've found very useful standing in line at the airport when maybe they're changing your flight, or you're about to walk into a meeting that's going to be challenging, or any time in life where you may just need to take a moment before you step into it. So you can do this either sitting or standing up. Anybody that wants to stand up, you can go ahead and stand up with me. And as you're standing, if you can think about kind of lifting up from the top of your head, like a puppet string is lifting up from the top of the head, your eyes can just kind of look gently down, kind of a soft gaze, lightly gazing down. Your hands can just be relaxed to your side. Maybe imagine you're standing in line, something that's not necessarily your favorite place to stand, like waiting for the groceries or waiting for the tickets. So take 3 deep breaths, and this is to stimulate the vagus nerve that tells your body to relax. 3 deep breaths. Breathe in, and let it out. Breathe in, and let it out. Now we're just going to move our attention from first the bottom of the feet, then we're going to ride the elevator all the way up and out the top of the head. So start with the bottom of your feet. Just become aware of your feet in contact with the ground. Just be aware of them. Place your attention at the bottom of your feet. Now move up to the top of your feet. Ankles. Calves. knees, thighs, hips, waist, chest, throat, third eye. Now the space just at the very top of the head, the soft spot where a baby has a soft spot. And now a foot above that, just the space a foot above your head. Now become aware of the space 2 feet above your head, 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet, 7 feet. From 7 feet up in that awareness, allow the awareness to expand out as far as you're comfortable. And take another deep breath from there. Now we're going to bring that elevator down 7 feet, 6 feet, 5 feet, 4 feet, 3 feet, 2 feet, 1 foot above the head, the top of the head, forehead, throat, chest, waist, hips, knees, ankles, top of the feet, and the soles of your feet. Then we just take another deep breath and repeat as needed. Thank you.
So helpful. Today's presentation, Surprising Discoveries from the Unconscious, presented by Sandy Britton. Brain science has increasingly demonstrated that your conscious mind, the part of your mind that you think of as self, is just a boat floating on the vast, dark ocean of the unconscious. It's becoming increasingly clear that the unconscious, in addition to controlling our body functions and storing our memories, is a source of our thoughts, emotions, perceptions, decisions, and actions. Most of the time, it works beautifully, but when something goes wrong, it can result in problems like depression, OCD, and PTSD. In this talk, we're going to hear about some of the latest discoveries in the neuroscience of the unconscious, as well as innovative therapies being developed for when things go wrong. Sandy is from Northern California. Her background is in software development, but she's always had a fascination with the computer between our ears. She combines her love of brain science and public speaking to bring us this talk. Please join me in welcoming Sandy Britton. Can you hear me? Yes? They say this mic is tricky, so we'll see what happens. Good morning and welcome. Thank you all for being here. Before I start, I want to ask you all to take this talk with a grain of salt. I am not a neuroscientist. I'm not any kind of scientist. And the accuracy of this will depend on the sources I chose, how well I interpreted them, how well I explained them to you, and especially because this is a very new science and it's changing constantly. It's in a state of flux, okay? They're making new discoveries all the time. So if something about this particularly grabs your attention, I encourage you to go research it on your own and find out what you can about it, okay? So I'm going to start with a story about a woman named Cheryl Schultz. And in 1997, Cheryl became a wobbler. She had surgery and was treated with the antibiotic gentamicin. And a few days after being released from the hospital, she completely lost her sense of balance. She couldn't stand, she couldn't walk without holding onto a wall. She went back to the doctor, obviously, very alarmed, and said, "What's wrong with me?" And he said, "Oh, we see this sometimes with gentamicin. It's pretty rare, but it can destroy your inner ear, your sense of balance." And she basically said, "Well, how do you fix it?" And he goes, "Well, we can't." So she's in this situation of having no sense of balance whatsoever. And that sounds pretty terrible to me. In 2001, she became a volunteer in a new therapy developed by the neuroscientist Paul Bach-y-Rita, which we're going to hear more about. He's considered one of the fathers of
of neuroplasticity. He had this new device he was trying out, which was a helmet that the person would wear, and it was attached to a little device you would put on your tongue. And the device would give you a little electrical current depending on which way you were leaning. So if you started leaning to the right, it would give a little electrical current on the right side of your tongue. To the left, a little on the left, forward on the front, and rearwards on the back. And so she volunteered to try this out. And she put the helmet on and put this thing on. And you kind of can imagine she's probably thinking, oh, okay, it's buzzing on the right, I need to straighten to the left. But that's not what happened. She only had it on a few minutes when her sense of vertigo fell completely away. And she was able to stand, she was so excited she climbed up on a chair, she was running laps, it completely came back to her. Okay, so how do we explain this? And it's not that her conscious mind figured it out, it's that her unconscious mind figured it out. Her unconscious mind basically said, I'm getting signals from your tongue that I used to get from your ear, and I'll just wire that back up to the thing that helps you keep your balance. And it all came back to her. Well, unfortunately, when she took it off, it went away again, although there was a brief residual effect. And she kept going back for treatments, and it was an experiment too, they kept lengthening the amount of time that she had it on. And the residual effect also kept lengthening. Somebody doesn't like this talk, okay? And so the residual effect also kept lengthening until it became permanent. Her sense of balance essentially came back even when she wasn't wearing the device. Okay, so I don't know how we explain that, if the brain finally figured out what the muscle tone, etc., that helped her keep her balance. But anyway, so they opened a balance center, and she ended up working there, helping people with these problems using this device. Okay, so in doing this, I'm talking about the unconscious mind. She probably couldn't have figured this out consciously. And in fact, if she tried to, it probably would have interfered. It's kind of like when you first learn to ride a bike, and you're thinking you have to figure out how to balance, but it really works once you relax and let your body figure it out for you, or let your unconscious mind figure it out for you. So what do I mean when I say the unconscious mind? Okay, I'm going to define it as all the mind processes, so the combination of your brain and nervous system, outside your conscious awareness. All right, so you probably figure, well, these are things that run my body systems, regulate my heartbeat and that type of thing. But it does a whole lot more. It also it runs your balance and movement, as we saw with the story about Cheryl. It processes all the input from your senses. It helps you produce speech and listen to and interpret speech, especially in your primary language. And it stores all your memories and retrieves them when you need them, and it processes your thoughts and it creates your thoughts and your feelings. So it's doing a whole lot of work. In fact, one of the sources I read said that your unconscious mind is processing about 10,000 bits of information per second, compared to your conscious mind processing 4 to 6 bits of information per second. Okay, so it's really a workhorse. I want to mention this has nothing to do with Freud or what he meant when he said unconscious, this place where you repress, your sexual feelings or something like that. Although he was a pioneer in the idea that we had something else going on besides our conscious awareness that was making us do things or think things. Okay, is that okay? Yeah. All right. No? Yeah. Now? Are we okay? Every time I move my head, it kind of shifts a little bit. Okay, so another thing to keep in mind about your unconscious mind is that it is focused on your survival as an organism. It does not care if you are happy. Okay, in fact, it kind of wants you to be a little anxious all the time, because then you're scanning the environment for problems and you're more likely to survive. It's your conscious mind that wants you to be happy or to have a sense of purpose or a spiritual experience. Okay? So an important but counterintuitive concept is that your unconscious mind is really in charge. Your unconscious mind is producing most of what you do and think in a day. The vast majority of it, okay? And that is such a counterintuitive thought that neuroscientists or people studying the brain and psychology and things like that didn't even want to countenance it until about the mid-20th century. Okay, and even after that, they were saying, well, since we can't really get into it, it's not a source of scientific study. But they developed some very clever behavior studies to try to understand the unconscious, and then over time they've developed better and better ways of scanning the actual activity. The functional MRI is the most recent. They can actually see your brain working and see what parts of it are active when different things are happening. And that has really, really advanced the science. And like I say, it's still in its infancy, but it's moving along very quickly. Okay? So one book I was reading basically said your unconscious only reports to the conscious mind it thinks are worthy of your awareness. And so he likened it to your unconscious mind is New York City with all the millions of people living in there and going about their business and doing their things. Your conscious mind is the New York Times that basically is watching all this and deciding which things you need to know about and writing little stories about it so you can be aware. Okay? But one thing that's very interesting is that your conscious mind wants to take credit for everything. Your conscious mind convinces you it's doing all the work. Okay? And your unconscious mind doesn't really have a problem with that because that makes you confident. It makes you, want to move forward and do the things you need to do to survive. So a simple example of this would be, there's a handout, if you guys could, that'll be going around, I'll be referring to in just a couple of minutes. I only have 50 copies, I know there's a lot more people than that here, so if you can kind of, as I talk about it, if you can kind of share it with people around you or pass it on, so I'll be getting to that in a minute. But a simple example would be when we touch something hot. Okay? You go to reach for the pan on the stove, you forget to use the pot holder, and you jerk your hand back. If you ask somebody why they did that, they would say, well, I touched it, I realized it was hot, I pulled my hand away. Okay? Now then when they actually do the studies on what's happening, when you touch that pan, a nerve impulse goes up your arm, it goes to your brainstem, the top of your spinal column, and then it splits into two. One of them runs right back down your arm and makes you pull your hand away. It just jerks that muscle back, okay? The other one goes up to the consciousness of your brain and says, ouch, that was hot. The one that says, ouch, that was hot, reaches a fraction of a second later than the one that says, pull your hand away. Okay? And yet, looking back on it later, we sure feel like I felt it was hot and that's why I pulled my hand away. But actually, your sensation of it being hot came after you pulled your hand away. And why do you even have to know that it was hot? Well, so you don't do it again, right? So you're more cautious the next time. They're also finding that the unconscious is a major player in decision-making of all kinds. So if an experimenter has you wired up and tells you, lift one of your hands, I don't care which one, and you lift your right hand, what has actually been happening is that a whole series of stuff went on in your unconscious that went through who knows what, we don't really know what logic process to make you lift your right hand. But if the experimenter asks you why you did it, you'll probably say something like, well, because that's the hand I write with, or that's my dominant hand, or I don't know, I just felt like it. Okay, but they can see that in your brain, the trigger to move your right hand actually happened before you were consciously had decided which hand to pick up. Okay, when you act on a hunch, it's because of all this mental processing that your brain has done, your unconscious has done, before it bubbles up to your consciousness. When you say, I just got an idea, there's probably a lot of work your unconscious did before it pushed that idea up to your consciousness. And we all have that sensation of trying to think of something, who starred in some movie, and we cannot think of their name, and we finally kind of give up, and then an hour later, boom, there it is. Okay, so your unconscious said, okay, I'll process that for you, and when I find it, I'll let you know. Okay, so we've all had that. Okay, has the handout gone around? Okay, so intuitively, we feel that our perceptions are unfiltered. In other words, that we see what's in front of our eyes. But optical illusions are a great example of the fact that that is not the case. Okay, so in this picture of this chessboard, you see the two squares marked A and B. What if I told you those are exactly the same color? Okay? If you don't believe it, then fold back on A and down on B. This might take a little manipulation, and put them together, and you will see they are exactly the same color. It even changes while you're folding it. Okay, so and please share that around if people around you don't have a copy. Okay, so what's happening there? It's kind of the reverse of what a painter does when they think, okay, this thing is orange, but this orange thing, the same color, is in shadow. I have to add a little dark so people will perceive it as being the same color. Your brain, your unconscious is pre-processing and saying, the thing in shadow must be actually a lighter shade than the thing outside of shadow, even though they're the same color, the same tone. Okay? This fascinates me. And one of the reasons is because even now that you know it, you cannot see it any differently. You still cannot see them as the same color. Your unconscious is not going to allow it. Your unconscious it knows to pre-process shadow, and it's going to do that whether you want it to or not. Okay, so along the same lines, we also think that our judgments are unbiased. And of course, they're going through all of the experiences that we've had through life, that our memories are accurate. Recent studies show that memories are constructed and constantly reconstructed, that our thinking is logical. But we try to make it logical, and that our decisions are rational. Of course, lots of experiments have shown that there's all sorts of ways to make people make decisions. Can you hear me? Okay. All right, but these beliefs allow us to act quickly and with confidence, and that's essential for survival, which explains the persistence of the optical illusion. The unconscious mind is not going to turn it over to your conscious mind. Okay? How many have heard that you use only 10% of your brain? Okay? Neuroscientists can't figure out where that came from. It's nonsense. Okay? In order to put enough brain power in your skull so that you're able to be born and not get stuck in your mother's pelvis with this huge skull, nature has had to fold the brain over and over and over and over and over in order to cram everything in there, and it uses all of it. It may not use all of it in every second, but it uses all of it. And in fact, parts of your brain are constantly battling for real estate. Your brain is not a monolith. There are many subsystems, and they have different jobs. Okay, so for instance, the parasympathetic versus the sympathetic nervous system, one of which revs you up in case of alarm, but the other that calms you back down because you can't maintain yourself in that state all the time, which is a problem in the modern world because we tend to stay in that highly aroused state and can't calm back down. Lots of times these subsystems fight for control. So you see a beautiful piece of chocolate cake, and the subsystem that wants to enjoy the chocolate cake is fighting with the one that doesn't want to gain weight or thinks you're already eating too much sugar. And which one wins will depend on your unconscious, right? So we're all familiar with these conflicts inside your brain. Another thing you need to understand about the brain and the unconscious mind is that it's very plastic. It's constantly changing. It's constantly rewiring itself based on your experiences. It can change due to injury, what you're eating, and your nutrition levels, how much oxygen it's getting, what drugs you're using, etc. can change your brain. And your thoughts can actually change your brain, which I'll talk about in a while. Okay? So to really become proficient at something, it has to move to your unconscious mind. So a good example of that would be, I think I see a lot of people here with glasses. I've worn them for a long time. When you first get a new pair, things don't look quite the same. Things look a little further away or a little closer. And you may have noticed that it only takes probably a few hours for your brain to adjust to it so you don't notice it anymore. Or the first time you get progressive lenses, it takes a little while for your brain to learn which part of the lens to look through, and after a while you don't have to even think about it anymore. Learning to play a musical instrument. If you're constantly thinking about what's happening when your fingers are on the piano, you're not going to get very far. You've got to turn that over to your unconscious. A sport, learning to drive. I remember when I first learned to drive, I couldn't fathom how somebody could tune a radio while they were concentrating on driving. And now, of course, we're adjusting the heating and the windshield wipers and everything while we're driving without really thinking about it. Or playing Tetris or other video games. I don't know how many have ever played that, where the little shapes swirl around and you have to fit them in the slots. And when you first play it, you feel like an idiot because you can't make anything work. And pretty soon, before you know it, and you don't really know why, it's all coming together, and it's a really good feeling. That's why video games are so addictive. This moving to your unconscious and this constant feedback that you're getting better and better at it. Or learning a language. For those of you here who are trying to learn Spanish, it's very, very difficult to learn a second language. It sits up in your unconscious your conscious mind for a long, long time. You're thinking through the rules. It takes a long time and a lot of practice and a lot of exposure for it to move down to your unconscious. To say how effortless your primary language is before a second language becomes anywhere near that effortless. Okay, so when things go wrong in the unconscious, they affect you in a major way. So if you have brain damage, mental illness, things like addiction, or even just bad habits, can really mess up your life. So what do we have? We have the unconscious mind. It's a closed system. It doesn't want to let you in. It wants to run itself. It controls us in ways we aren't aware of. It's constantly changing and not always for the better. And so what do we do when things go wrong? I like this quote. This is from a movement therapist who is incorporating mind work with physical therapy to give people better balance and movement. He says, humans don't get to decide what they find threatening, stressful, or painful any more than a cat does. That decision is left to ancient unconscious systems that really can't be reasoned with. Okay, so what do we do when things go wrong? Well, the more we understand about how it works, the better we're able to answer that question. Modern treatments are starting with the recognition that mind is a physical thing and that it's plastic. Okay, so that mind is things that are happening, all these chemical and electrical things that are happening in your nervous system, in your brain, and that it's changing and can constantly change. So we've gone from thinking that mental illness was a result of demonic possession, and up until very recently that it was maybe a lack of moral fiber. If you're depressed, well, just get up and get with it. We can look at a broken leg and see what's wrong. We're not very good at looking at broken brains, but we're getting better and better at it. So one of the things that's come up out of this is the psychopharmacology, the medications for anxiety and depression. And these are a recognition that it's a physical system and that sometimes the chemicals can get out of balance, and we try to put them back in balance. This has certainly helped countless people to deal with their problems, but it does have its side effects. You can develop a tolerance. You can even develop augmentation, where if you quit using it, the problem is worse than it ever was. And a lot of times you need to keep using it. So we're looking for better ways that don't need that, or that can use that as just a starter point and take you to something permanent. So I'm going to go back to Paul Bach-y-Rita, the guy who invented the little balance thing on the tongue. Okay? His quote was, if you give the brain the info it needs, it'll figure it out. So his goal is to always try to figure out how to give the brain the info that it needs that you've lost. So if you've lost your inner ear, how do you tell the brain about balance? Okay? So he's also done a similar thing with blindness, where with a grid on the tongue that shows the shapes of things out in the world. And why the tongue is because the tongue has so many nerve endings and can distinguish tiny little changes in this electrical grid. And blind people who have used it report not only that they are able to figure out what's going on out in the world, but that it's not that they're sitting there thinking, okay, this is shaped like that and therefore that thing must be out there. It's that their visual system kicks in and gives them an impression of a world out there. In other words, they now become aware of shapes, things moving out in the world at a distance from them. They get to the point where they can actually play catch and things like that with these devices. Another really interesting thing that's going on is human echolocation, where people have actually figured out how to make noises with their tongue or their cane. When blind people are tapping cane, they may unconsciously be using echolocation. There are people who are mountain biking, blind people who are mountain biking using echolocation. Okay, so because the visual system is still intact and it wants the information about the outside world, you have to figure out some way to convey that, and it will be able to build, obviously not a visual image, but an image of the world that the person can use. Another thing is cochlear implants. Okay, the implants they put to give deaf people a sense of hearing that they attach up to the brain. Paul Bocchiarita was not involved in this, but it's a very similar thing. One of the problems they find is that if a hearing person goes deaf and then gets a cochlear implant, the information conveyed by the implant is so vague, so macro compared to their original hearing that that it's just a buzz. And what they found out was that if they have these people talk out loud to themselves, the brain can figure it out. The brain knows what he's saying. It goes in the ear and it's able to work out what buzzy sounds mean what talking sounds. Does that make sense? And in 2 or 3 weeks, the person reports that their hearing feels normal again from working on this therapy. Okay? There's a lot of advances being made in stroke. Paul Bocchiarita, his dad actually had a very bad stroke, and him and his brother worked with the father on various things and got him back to a level where he was teaching college classes again after his stroke. Okay, so one of the things they discovered in researching stroke is that part of the problem is the brain's battle for real estate. So let's say you have a stroke that's paralyzed your left arm. At first, they don't know if there's permanent damage to the brain in that area or if it's just inflammation, because after a stroke for 2 or 3 weeks, there's going to be bad inflammation in that area, and that could be the result of that be causing the paralysis. Okay, so what used to happen was they figured your brain's damaged, it's never coming back, and you got to learn to live with this. You know, get better at your other hand. Let's say you're right-handed, get better at using your left hand. Now they've realized that what's happening is that during that inflammation period, the other hand is infiltrating that real estate in the brain and taking it over. And so even after the inflammation goes down, the left arm has lost its real estate. How do you get it back? Well, there's therapies going on where they basically immobilize your good arm, so you have to use the other arm, and then put you through all these exercises that start at a very gross motor level and work up to a fine motor level to get the brain working again. Now, that works great if it was only inflammation and you just need to gain back the real estate. What if there was real damage? Well, even when there was real damage, you can move that knowledge to other parts of the brain. In other words, that arm can start to try to go grab some real estate from somewhere else. And this is the study of neuroplasticity has told people, has made it clear that other parts of your brain can take over. Even completely disparate parts of your brain can take over for a lost part of the brain. Okay, so they're working more and more on that. All right, phantom limb. What's going on with a phantom limb? You've lost your arm in an amputation, and it still feels like it's there. You can still feel it moving. It feels like it's spasming. It's causing pain. This is really distressing for people who have lost a limb. For a lot of them, this never goes away, and it really interferes with their life. So there's a lot of theories about what it is. If the nerve endings in the stump are still conveying messages, encroachment by other body parts. If your arm is right next to your arm control and sensation is right next to your face. So what they found is that the face invades the arm area, the face area invades the arm area, and by touching places in the face, you can create sensation in the lost arm. Okay? So now trying to figure out how do you tell the last thing is that they think that the brain is not receiving signals from the arm. It gets confused and it starts putting out an alarm saying, check your arm, I'm going to make your arm hurt. So you say, I'm going to make your arm feel like it's spasming. So you move it. You're not using your arm correctly. And so what they need to do is, there's something called mirror box therapy. I don't know if any of you have seen it, where you actually put your good arm in and it's mirrored so that your brain thinks you still have two arms. You move this arm, so the brain thinks you're moving the other arm, and it kind of goes, oh, okay, I guess that arm's still there. And over time, it can take several sessions, the problem can improve. It doesn't work with everybody, they're not sure why, but it's a great insight that's got us on the road to dealing with phantom limb pain. And what they're finding now is that just visualization exercises of moving that arm are enough to, can mimic the mirror box. Okay? Obsessive compulsive disorder. Oh, another thing about the phantom limb, when they say when the pain goes away, is that just the placebo effect? A lot of people might say. Okay, so I like this quote from this guy who wrote this book called Why We Sleep, which I highly recommend. His name is Matthew Walker. He says, the placebo effect is the most reliable effect in all of pharmacology. No matter what drug you're testing, you will find the placebo effect. Okay? And so basically, if we could learn how to harness the placebo effect without doing the unethical thing of not telling people that they're taking the placebo, we're a long ways towards resolving a lot of issues. Okay? Another one, obsessive compulsive disorder. So you start with an obsession. For instance, I left the stove on and the compulsion is to keep going back and checking it. Nobody is quite sure where these obsessions come from. It appears to be a physical problem. For instance, children can have strep throat and afterwards develop the obsessive compulsive disorder. But the compulsions are rituals that give relief, and so by repeating them over and over and over, we're really wiring into the brain this idea of, yes, there's really something wrong and I've got to do this to fix it. And so one of the best treatments they have for it right now came out of cognitive behavior therapy. It's called exposure and response prevention. Okay, so you have to expose the person to their trigger, and then they withhold the response. It has to start at a very gradual level, desensitize very gradually, so you'd expose them to their trigger from a distance or something like that, and then for at least a little while, they have to resist the response. Trying to get a message back to the brain that you don't have to do this, you don't have to perform this ritual, and eventually the brain gets the idea that there was never really anything wrong to begin with. Okay? That's how they think it works anyway. And it's working really well. It also works for things like phobias and even certain types of anxiety, just regular anxieties. And what's interesting is you're thinking, well, that's my conscious mind, feeding to my unconscious mind. Probably you've actually fed your unconscious mind the idea of resisting the compulsion, and it's actually helping you do it when you're going through this. Another problem that that a lot of people have big issues with is PTSD, post-traumatic stress. In this case, a very traumatic experience creates such a strong association with fear and anxiety that it gets instantly wired in. And so every time the brain is exposed to anything like the original trigger, it explodes. It basically, goes back to the original traumatic reaction. And it's very, very hard to work with because basically you have to pull that memory back up in order to work with it. What you want is to get the brain to reconstruct it and put it away again a little softer, a little softer, a little softer. But by pulling it up, the person goes is so traumatized that you can't create that reconstruction. So they're trying a lot of different things, but interestingly, one of the things that they're having the best luck with is a drug called MDMA. I can't pronounce the whole name, but it's the active drug in the street drug ecstasy. Okay? And it creates strong feelings of empathy and trust. So they give this to the people before they try to get them to reconstruct the trauma, and it allows them to have that thought in their mind without having the reaction, and then the memory gets constructed and put away, and over a series of treatments, it can greatly improve the problem. Once again, it doesn't work with everybody, but it's showing a lot of promise. Obviously, it's a little difficult to do because it's an illegal drug, and they have to get permission to run these trials. So, it's moving along slower than people would like. And that kind of takes us to another form of bad wiring, chronic pain. There's a lot of situations where chronic pain is no longer related to actual tissue damage, that people can have surgery and they still won't feel any better. Okay, and sometimes the doctor will say something like it's all in your head, and people get very offended because they're interpreting it to mean you're imagining things. But the truth is that all pain is in your brain. Pain is not in your body, it's in your brain. It's your brain interpreting the signals that are coming and trying to decide how much to alarm you. So you'll hear these stories of people getting, like on the battlefield, getting an arm blown off, and they don't even feel it until later when they're safe, because the brain is saying, I can't have you worry about the pain right now. You've got to get to a safe place. Okay? So the brain is doing all this interpretation. So once again, a quote. Pain can exist even in the absence of tissue damage because pain results from perception of threat, and perception does not always match reality. Pain is essentially an alarm, and alarms sometimes go off even when there is no real danger. And they sometimes fail to go off even when there is real danger. So, for instance, if you have, say, a neck problem and it gets worse when you move a certain way, you start to guard and you start to not move in that way, and that can cause muscle contraction and things like that, which can make the problem worse. And your brain is constantly wiring, when you move, it hurts. When you move, it hurts. So that even when they've managed to resolve the problem, when you move, it still hurts. So this guy I talked about before who was doing the movement therapy, what was his name? Todd? I don't remember, but he was doing the movement therapy. It goes with mind work to try to help your brain understand that the problem is gone. And it takes a lot of kind of back and forth between actually working out the muscles and all of that and helping your brain understand that the problem is gone. But it can even work in cases where there still is damage, and visualizations and stuff can help you control or deal with or detach yourself a little from the pain and live a better life. Okay? And then there's brain out of balance, like anxiety and depression. Like I said, there's different parts of your brain battling for control. And anxiety results when the part that's sending you alarm signals becomes stronger than the part that is rationally calming you back down. Depression, when the part that's saying, life sucks, there's no point, is out of balance with the one that says, no, there's lots to enjoy, and this won't last forever. And they verify these things with brain imaging. They can actually see the growth or the extra activity in like the amygdala, which sends the alarm signals, versus the other parts of the brain that would normally be calming you down have become weaker. And the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that they give for depression and anxiety help restore this balance. But what you really need at that point is to expose yourself to lots and lots of situations so the brain, rewires in the light of this better feeling. And so that's why therapy helps with, in addition to the drugs. And something that's working really well for anxiety and depression is, I think it's psilocybin, I don't remember, psilocybin, okay, somebody out there pronounced it right. That's the active drug in magic mushrooms. That is showing huge promise for people with anxiety and depression, and in only 1 or 2 treatments. In controlled clinical treatments where you have somebody that essentially guides you through the experience, for some reason, it helps you get in touch with the parts of your brain that make you feel better. and it has a very long-lasting effect. Once again, they're having a really hard time doing those studies because of the legal issues, but that's showing a lot of promise. And then there's cognitive behavior therapy that trains you to not pay so much attention to the stories your unconscious mind is constantly feeding your conscious mind, to detach a little bit from those stories and maybe see things a little more accurately. And meditation, mindfulness and meditation that you were going through just a little while ago. And the real idea behind that with mindfulness meditation is to become aware of the messages your brain is feeding you. Is to really start to become aware of the stories. And so in mindfulness meditation, you, for instance, focus on the breath, and you send a little message to your unconscious that says, I'm trying to focus on the breath, so let me know if my mind wanders. Another part of your brain is still trying to feed you all the stories and stay active in the monkey mind and all the chatter. But this other part of your brain, hopefully you're engaging it to go, wait a minute, you're not concentrating on the breath, you've gotten off track, you're attaching to these stories again, and you can gradually build up that part of the brain so that it works better all the time. And that can be very helpful for things like anxiety and depression, or just to live a better life. So I think that's that. That's all I had. I wanted to wrap up with a great quote, but I couldn't find one. So I hope that was interesting and open to questions.
I love that. Okay, where are we starting? David, you have somebody right over there, right there. So the way questions work is you raise your hand, a mic will be brought to you, you stand up, you hold the mic close, and you ask a question more than pontificate.
It was a great presentation. If you have a non-neurotypical brain, let's say ADHD or something, how are some of the conscious mind and unconscious mind that you're discussing interplay?
So like I said, I'm not a neuroscientist. I don't know the answer to that, but I would suspect that it could, like with OCD, when you've got bad wiring in your brain or messages going kind of out of control, I would suspect that these kind of approaches can work with that also. And I would imagine they're researching that. I didn't look at that specifically.
Okay, in the back. Yes.
Sandy, can you tell us what the difference is between unconscious and subconscious minds?
I did a lot of research on that, and it's kind of just semantics. That some people call it unconscious. Some people even want to call it the new unconscious because they don't want it mixed up with Freud. Some people call it the subconscious, and some even say subliminal. So I don't really think that there's a big difference.
Regarding the piece about learning a new language, I always thought it was just age appropriate that we're older. Do you know why it's easier for children? At least that's what I keep hearing. Little kids can learn much quicker and much better.
They've done some research on that, and they're not sure if that's really true, although it certainly appears to be true, and I'm not saying it's not. Part of it is because they don't already have a first language embedded in there to interfere with the learning. And there certainly does seem to be a sensitive period where they're really absorbing the language. I think a lot of it is that as an adult we try to make things too conscious, whereas a kid they're not thinking about it, they're just letting it happen. But the truth is they're not really sure, and they're not really sure what it takes to move a second language into those primary language centers, but it can happen.
Blue?
Back here. In this area with the cobblestones and with our age, a lot of people I know have some balance problems. And you mentioned using the mind, and is there a book or is there a reference or is there something that I could go do more research on in that
Let me
topic?
find that guy's name. I would look up his website to start. Where is that quote? His name is Todd Hargrove. Hargrove, 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 who runs these movements. But the thing is that you can't think your way into it. I guess that's what I'm trying to tell you. You have to expose yourself to the experiences that will help you gain better balance, if that makes sense.
Yoga standing.
And actually walking on cobblestones is supposed to be a really good way.
Yes, in the back.
When I was 29 years old, I lost the balance nerve on my left side as the result of a benign brain tumor. And when, everybody knows you need a balance nerve on each side for balance, and yet I'm standing up. When I immediately post-surgery, I literally could not stand up. I didn't have the balance to stand up. And over a course of some months, the brain took over.
Right.
I'm curious if you have any insights on the mechanism involved in that.
I don't know if anybody really knows the mechanism, but I suspect it was able to interpret the signals from your one ear and by matching it with reality, figure out how to, use those signals.
Okay.
Hi, Sandy. This was very good, thank you. My question is understanding the impact of the unconscious mind on the conscious mind. What, in your opinion, is possible in the other direction? What impact can the conscious mind have on the unconscious, and if there is any impact, to what degree?
Well, like I said, in the OCD case, you are consciously deciding not to respond in your normal ritual. You may only be able to control it for a few seconds at first, but you're consciously deciding. The problem is we don't know if you're consciously deciding because your unconscious is helping you consciously decide. In other words, There are some neuroscientists who think that consciousness is just an artifact. It's just a side effect of a sophisticated brain, that we don't really need it. Okay? There's others that believe it does have a purpose or an influence. They're not sure yet. So that's the best answer I can give to that right now.
Sir, you need
Could
to have
you-
a microphone.
Talk at all about dreams.
Dreams. Freud obviously thought that dreams were a message from the unconscious. This book I was reading by this Matt Walker about sleeping, which, like I said, I highly recommend. He basically thinks that they don't really think that's true. They think that your dreams are is your mind trying to reorganize itself, and it's trying to interpret. In other words, your visual center is being stimulated, and things are being stimulated while it's doing this work, and your mind is just trying to interpret that. There's no real symbology there. Who knows? Okay, so psychotherapists may still say yes, neurologists no, and there's probably some middle ground.
Since all decisions and purchases are essentially emotional, I'm interested in the intersection of that with web design. How is it that the user experience can reflect some of these learnings?
I think we all know that advertisers do lots and lots and lots of experiments to find out how to trigger our, gotta buy this. And so I'm sure websites come under that too. I mean, I don't know that much about marketing, but I'm sure that that's a lot of what they're trying to do is stimulate your unconscious. Now, this idea of it, like subliminal messages, they've shown that to be not effective. That doesn't really happen. But the emotional triggers that a message can give are definitely very effective.
Margaret, stand up.
Pathological liars used to be considered hopeless cases, and that it was a form of obsessive compulsive disorder. Has there been any advance in that area?
I haven't read anything about that. I mean, one thing about pathological liars is that it doesn't trigger the normal tells in the body, the normal distress in the body of a person lying. Okay, so that they can pass lie detector tests and stuff like that because they simply don't have the emotional reaction. So whether you can recreate an emotional reaction that's absent, I don't really know.
Is that true?
What's that?
Very interesting, thanks. We didn't talk much about relationships. I would imagine the unconscious mind has a great deal to do with breakdowns in relationship, et cetera, in terms of attraction, revulsion, etc. But I'm focused primarily on like the divorce rate and the lack of communication and fear.
I don't know if I can answer that directly. I can tell you that humans being a social animal, a huge part of our mind is devoted to social interaction. In fact, I'm reading a new book that I wasn't able to incorporate because I'm just now reading it about how accurately our unconscious mind reads things like body signals and inflection and stuff like that, even when they conflict with the words in the message. And that a lot of evolutionary scientists think that one of the reasons we have such a big brain is to manage our social interactions. So the unconscious definitely has something to do with it in terms of what it's interpreting and all of that. But I'm not sure what studies have actually been done into that.
Right here.
It's a great presentation. As we're learning some of the most recent discoveries in neuroscience about the unconscious mind, a deeper philosophical question comes to mind. What does this do to any philosophical notion of free will? Because it appears that so many of our decisions are happening on a subterranean level. It kind of deflates any idea of free will and like autonomy for human beings.
Well, the guy who handed you the mic actually did a talk on that. And yes, neuroscientists are kind of coming to the conclusion that most of what you decide it comes from a place that you can't consciously access. And that as a result of things that have happened to you all your life that you had no control over. Okay, so addressing the philosophical side, I can't say, but the neuroscientific side, they're kind of going, eh. Pretty much it's the unconscious.
Okay, over here.
I just wanted to add to the conversation a book that I've been reading lately by Michael Pollan, the well-respected
Oh yeah, I've heard of that one too.
He wrote The Omnivore's Dilemma and
Uh-huh.
several other very respected science-based books. This one is called Change Your Mind, and it's about all the new research that's being done into psilocybin and LSD and MDA and all the other alphabets and how promising all of that is.
Yeah, the psychedelics.
Yeah, and if
The
anybody wants
psychedelics
something
that are
very,
not addictive.
Exactly. If
And-
somebody wants something that's very layman friendly to read on the science of all of this, this is a really fine book, and it just came out.
Very fascinating.
Thank you.
It's called Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan.
Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. Hello, Michael. in the
There
back.
are lots of stories of scientists who, in their sleep solved what seemed an impossible problem, and then they woke up to it all being solved. And I've had that experience myself, where you had something that was difficult or something at work, and in the morning you knew exactly how to do it.
Yes.
Is there some way of making that better, like making the subconscious actually do a good job?
I don't know if there is, but it's certainly worth working on. I mean, in this book about sleep, he's basically talking about how active your mind is while you're asleep. And that possibly one of the reasons we need to sleep, would put you in a state of paralysis, which shuts you off the outside world, is that processing perception takes up so much of your brain that it doesn't have time to solve problems and manage memory and put memories in storage and all that. It has to shut everything down in order to be able to do that. And it's super, super important. So that's one of the reasons that those things happen at night. But it would be very good if we could figure out how to tap into that more effectively.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for all your questions and things you said. Really appreciate it. Wonderful. We'd like to see you next week, so come again. Please do. Turn on your telephones if you'd like to. If you want your brain to be more active, turn on your telephones. Stack your chairs, pick up your coffee cups. Don't forget your shawls and your bracelet and your shoes. Put your shoes back on. See you next week.